The following video may contain views and opinions that differ from yours. If you don't like it, tough shit. Alrighty, so this video. Now this video sort of started in the form of a request from one of my subscribers, Holiday197, on my latest Joey Ryan video, where he said he'd like to hear my thoughts on the current state of WWE. So I figured, why the hell not? I've got my own thoughts and whatever on the WWE at the moment. So hey, here it is. So essentially, I'm not going to really give my thoughts on WWE as a whole because, to be honest, the main roster bores the shit out of me. I watch the odd pay-per-view here or there. SmackDown's pretty good. NXT's pretty good. Raw is a festering trash pile in spite of the fact I love having fucking Bobby Lashley as a champion. That's fucking amazing. I actually love generally everybody holding a belt at the moment, but Raw's crap. SmackDown is pretty decent. NXT's not bad, but I've kind of lost interest in NXT a bit because I feel NXT stagnated just a little bit, and rather than crafting original characters and shit, it's just Rexing guys from everywhere else. Which is kind of part of the problem with WWE at the moment. Because theoretically, your main roster should be thriving. WWE should be fucking untouchable right now. WWE should be standing above everybody else in terms of quality right now because of their roster. Triple H took over NXT, running NXT in 2012, and basically has John Laurinaitis' old job as the head of talent relations. So every time one of your favourite indie wrestlers or wrestlers from somewhere else gets signed to WWE, Triple H is usually the one that's gone, yoink! So Tripp signs them, and the main roster 9 times out of 10 fucks them up. But you would think, with the number of guys WWE's raxed off the indies, and all the super talented wrestlers they already had, they'd be killing it, right? Except there is one problem. And that's a senile old man who won't step down and fuck off, Vince McMahon. Vince is the problem. But you see, the reason Vince is the problem is kinda misattributed, right? Like the way Vince is the problem. Because a lot of people talk about how since the Attitude Era, Vince has lost his way. How since the late 90s and 2000 and the first part of 2001, Vince has gone from just being absolutely fantastic and knowing what the fuck he's doing, to progressively getting more and more arrogant and worse since he brought out WCW and ECW. Well, my view is, when I hear things like that, I have to question how long some people have been watching wrestling. Because you see, there are a lot of problems with the way Vince McMahon brings things to the table. And I'd like to break them down problem by problem with the most common things. But I put it to you this way. A lot of the problems aren't Vince suddenly liking these things that people don't. Vince has always liked these things people don't. He's just had to suppress them when he's had competition. A lot of the things that Vince fucking does nowadays is shit he's been guilty of for decades. Most of your motherfuckers just haven't borne witness to it because he wasn't doing it for a fair bit and is going back to doing it. So let's go on a journey, shall we? And I will explain why a lot of these complaints are old school Vince McMahon, not new school Vince McMahon. See, my dear viewer, this is a mutation of another Vince favourite of bringing his old guys back to look good versus his new guys, which essentially cuts the legs out from the new guys, which leads to the product stagnating. Now, we all know how bad 1995 was. Yeah. Essentially, there was some lead up to that you could see as far back as 2 years prior. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Wrestlemania 9 I will speak about. But there was also an incident in 1985 where Vince brought back Bruno Sammartino. Bruno Sammartino is basically God in professional wrestling. Like, if you know your wrestling history, Bruno is basically God if you're an old school wrestling fan. Combined 13 years with a world title. The man is a legend. But Vince decided to bring Bruno back in 1985 to try and put over his useless son David. Let's put it this way. If you thought David Flair was bad, David Sammartino made David Flair look like David Flair's father by comparison. And that's a hard fucking bar to reach. But anyway, WrestleMania 9. So, in the lead up to WrestleMania 9, Vince was a wee bit, Yokozuna won the Royal Rumble in 93, was set to face Bret Hart. Yokozuna was Vince's new monster heel, man. And Yokozuna was fantastic. For a big man, he could move, he could wrestle, he was fucking good. If you've never watched any of Yokozuna's matches, pause this video, go watch some Yokozuna matches, come back, and resume the video. But Yokozuna was the new monster heel in the WWF at the time. And so the plans were for Yokozuna to beat Bret and win the title and have a pretty decent title reign. Except up until that point, a heel had never won in the main event of WrestleMania. WrestleMania had always been about giving the good guy the big rub and sending the crowd home happy. So Vince was getting cold feet. And then in came a certain orange piece of shit from out of the sunset. Yes, the orange hobgoblin known as Terry Bollea returned to the WWE, looking much, much slimmer after the steroid scandals of the 2 years previous, and got in Vinnie Mac's ear. And told him, hey, brother, a babyface should win the title, or should keep the title, win the title, whatever, let the crowd go home happy. Vince is like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, keep the belt on Bret. Hogan's like, nah, brother, it should be me. Vince is like, well, you were the guy that made this company relevant, and you've been my top guy, whether you've been here or not, for the last 9 years. Sweet. Under the bus you go, Bret. So Bret dropped the belt to Yoko. Yoko barely had time to celebrate before Hogan came out. They had a fuck finish, and Hogan wins the belt and goes home with the title. Now, it should be said that Hogan didn't actually defend the title between then and King of the Ring 93 when he lost the title and pissed off from the WWE until 2002. See, what happened is Hogan's such an asshole that he went to Japan. While WWE champion, did a press conference because he started working for New Japan at the time, referred to the WWE title as a trinket and a toy, and said that the New Japan World Heavyweight title is what he was after. The New Japan World title, the IWGP Heavyweight title, you know what the hell I mean. But anyway, Hogan did this press conference where he said the WWF belt was a trinket and a toy and he wanted the IWGP title. Word got back to Vince McMahon, and as you can expect, Vince McMahon wasn't happy. So Vince immediately threw Hogan into the ring with Yokozuna at King of the Ring 93, where Hogan dropped the belt, back to Yokozuna, damage done. Yeah, Yoko was still impressive, but not as impressive as he would have been with an uninterrupted title run that hadn't been ended by fuckery. Because Hogan wouldn't, it's Hogan. He wouldn't drop the belt clean. There was fuckery afoot, involving a fake Japanese cameraman and some flash paper. So Hogan dropped the belt and left. You'd think that would have taught Vince, but no. No. And Hogan's not the only example, right? Once WCW started snapping out Vince's guys from the 80s like Hogan, Savage, even some of his then current guys like Nash and Hall, guys like Ted DiBiase, guys like Virgil who became Vincent, those sort of guys, your big names, as fucking big as Vincent gets, I guess, but your big-ish names. They even picked up guys like IRS and so on and so forth, Miss Elizabeth, what have you. Basically half of the NWO. And so what Vince would do is he would drag whatever guys he had left that weren't under WCW contract out from wherever the fuck they were at and threw them on TV to pop a rating. It's why he brought back Piper in 96. It's why he brought Jake the Snake back in 96. It's why the Honky Tonk Man kept showing up on our TV screens in spite of everybody wanting him not to between 1996 and 2001. Vince loves his old guys, okay? Go back and watch any of the new generation bullshit. You have a shit ton of old guys from the 80s still showing up every now and then. Hell, it's why the Warrior kept coming back so many times. Because Vince loves forgiving these guys and giving them a second chance. So Vince bringing back old guys from years and years ago isn't a new thing. And if I were a gambling man and Vince was still doing the whole old school thing and hadn't gone down the route of the Attitude Era, Pretty sure Bruno Sammartino might have had a title reign in 1998. And if you're wondering, Damo, what are you getting at? Let's put it this way. Goldberg winning the title in 2020, or 2019, or whenever the fuck Goldberg last won a title, is basically the equivalent to Bruno Sammartino winning a world title off Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1998. I'm not even kidding. Go look at the time difference, and you'll see I'm bang on the money. So Vince loves his old guys. Vince really loves his old guys. Vince always sees his old guys as a fix. You can't work out why your common everyday guy doesn't get behind the new generation. It's because Vince tells them not to. And that's that. Problem number 2, and this is a long time one that people have had in regards to Vince. Vince loves big sweaty men, to quote King Ross, formerly of What Culture, currently of Cultaholic. Yeah, it's true. Vince loves his big guys. Vince really, really loves his big guys. You go back as far as Andre the Giant, and Vince has loved his big guys. And a lot of them have sucked. A lot of them have really, really sucked. Whether it's big guys, big fat guys, or just fat guys, Vince loves it. For the most part. There are some fat guys he doesn't like, but that's probably because they're average sized rather than... Let's put it this way. The Great Khali. Failed experiment. No. Great Khali was meant to be the next big thing in WWE. Obviously he wasn't. Put it this way. Great Khali used to be mobile. He wasn't a good wrestler, but he used to be mobile. There's footage of him vaulting over the ropes in New Japan when he was part of Club 7 with Giant Silver. Yeah. Khali obviously deteriorated between then and 2006. So this is 2002, I believe they were teaming up as part of Masahiro Chono's Team 2000. 2006 he came to WWE, and by then he could barely walk. And we all know what happened with Khali. Speaking of Giant Silver's former Oddity stablemate Kurgan. He was meant to be another big deal, and this is back in everybody's hallowed attitude era. So even during Vince's most prosperous time, he was trying to shove big, plotting guys down our throat. Kurgan was part of the Truth Commission with Don Callis as his manager. Kurgan and Callis split away from the Truth Commission. Kurgan went on a tear of squashing guys, including his former stablemates, and then disappeared when Vince realized he was awful. So Vince tried it again with the Oddities. Don Callis left the company, and then Vince turned the Oddities into a comedy act. Not bad, mind you, because the Oddities were a very popular mid-card act. And for once, I will throw props to the ICP. That entrance theme is a fucking banger. Once again, if you've never heard it, pause the video, find that entrance video on YouTube, watch it, unpause my video, continue. I'm giving you motherfuckers a lot of homework, aren't I? Anyway, so Kurgan. Yeah, nah. As I say, Yokozuna was great. Yokozuna was one time Vince hit it out of the park. Yokozuna was fantastic. Vader was also fantastic, but he was getting on in years when WWE signed him, and Shawn Michaels politicked him out of a main event spot. SummerSlam 96 is notorious. Whatever. And I know I'm working backwards, but it's whatever. You get my point. Viscera was another one. Viscera, Big Daddy V, King Mabel, whatever you want to call him. When Viscera came back to the WWE in 98, 99, and 2004, 2005, he never rose above the mid-card, and there's a reason for that. With the Men on a Mission tag team, once they turned heel, Vince started pushing Mabel, the then Mabel, up the card. He won 1995's absolute shit bomb of a King of the Ring tournament, went on to main event SummerSlam 95 with Diesel. The match is fucking awful. The match is notoriously bad, and Viscera was notoriously dangerous to the point Nash almost got him fired. Because here's your difference between Mabel's finisher and Yokozuna's finisher. Yokozuna's bonsai drop looks devastating because when you look at it on its face value, big fat Samoan guy jumping, squashing you with his ass. Except when Yokozuna lands, he lands on his feet with his ass barely touching you. It just gives the illusion he's squashing you with his ass. Mabel kicks his legs out. So you had a 552-pound guy landing ass first on the small of your back. There's no safe way to do that. It's legitimately dangerous. Then there's the fact that he tried to leg drop The Undertaker and fucked up Undertaker's orbital bone, which led to that Phantom of the Opera masked Undertaker war for a little bit. And that's why that push ended. And speaking of Diesel, Nash, Kevin Nash, one of my favourite wrestlers, all jokes aside, charismatic, funny, matches not that great, depending. His match versus Bret Hart at Survivor Series 95 is a favourite of mine. His heel run in WWE from early 96 to when he buggered off to WCW, classic, fantastic. Whole bunch of great matches against Shawn in that time. I'm rambling. Nash was a success somewhat as a character, but he's the lowest drawing champion of all time. Now, admittedly, that's because he only really had guys like Viscera to feud with. But Nash wasn't it, because they did what they did with Roman Reigns and basically turned him from cool, tough heel to smiling Gary good guy. That shit didn't work past the 80s, okay? And that's something else I'll touch on in a bit. But that's something that hasn't worked past the 80s for Nash, for Shawn Michaels. It wasn't until Vince struck gold with Steve Austin he's like, hey, I've got something here. And then went straight back to turning his main guys into smiling Gary good guys with John Cena. Yeah, as I say, I'll touch on that in a bit. But Nash is a different case. Nash is at least semi-mobile and could work when he gave a fuck. So Nash wasn't really a failure, but he was a big guy because Vince loves big guys. And the last one I'll touch on is Giant Gonzales, who was signed from WCW. El Gigante in WCW. Former basketball player. Legit goes 7'8". Huge dude. Except he's built like a rake. So Vince put him in this ugly looking bodysuit, but the problem is he couldn't work worth a shit either. Giant Gonzales is the only disqualification win in Taker's streak. The finish of that match was Giant Gonzales smothering Undertaker's face with a chloroform-soaked rag. That's just pathetic, and that's how much he couldn't work, is he lost due to a chloroform-soaked rag. Giant Gonzales, God rest his soul, was terrible. Vince McMahon loves big sweaty men, whether they work or not. And 9 times out of 10, they really don't. Now then, that point I made about white meat baby faces, let's talk about that, because that's another thing. Vince got flack in the mid-2000s for turning John Cena from a cool gangster rapper into just a lame generic white meat baby face who squashed everybody, never lost clean, and just basically pissed people off by doing the same old. Oh yeah, people look at Cena fondly now, but I think that's mainly due to nostalgia filter and because the last few years he was a full-timer. He actually did some damn good in-ring work, and he actually lost cleanly more than he didn't. So, you know, Cena sort of redeemed himself, but growing up, I remember, well, I say growing up, I was in my late teens, but Cena got a lot of vitriol back then. Cena got a shit ton of vitriol. Roman Reigns probably got it worse, because a lot of people thought they were doing the same thing with Roman they did with Cena. I disagree because Roman lost cleanly a lot, like his feud with Braun Strowman. Braun went over a few times. Roman did the JOB a lot more on PPV than Cena did. People just had paranoia. It was a combination of paranoia and groupthink, but it's the same thing Vince did with Cena. He turned Roman from this silent, badass killer into a guy who spouted lame lines like suffering succotash son and so on and so forth. But again, this is a Vince trope because, you know, back in the day, your good guys were your good guys, you know, when wrestling was treated like a legitimate sport. The good guys were the guys that fought cleanly, they smiled, they high-fived people, they kissed babies, they hugged fat girls. They were the moral upstanding citizens of society. That's why everybody loved Bruno Sammartino, because Bruno Sammartino was the definition of a clean-cut babyface. It's why people love Bob Backlund. It's why Bob Backlund was the face of the company after Sammartino left. It's why Iron Sheik was a transitional champion when Vince brought Hulk Hogan back. Hulk Hogan was a heel until he came back to WWE in 1983. Hulkamania was the first time Hogan had really been a babyface. So Hogan wins the belt in 84, and that leads to Hogan being a white meat babyface. Hogan was the guy that brought wrestling into the mainstream. So Vince was like, obviously this works and this is the formula I'm going to stick to. Have my badass white meat babyface have some big scary threat that looks intimidating building up to the big showdown, and then have them whoop their ass and they can go to the back of the line and then the next guy can come up. Except that formula didn't really work past the 80s. Ultimate Warrior was not a white meat babyface because the dude was just too fucking nuts to be generic. He was kind of a dick too, but then that's because Jim Hellwig was a complete fucking asshole. And I have no qualm saying that. I know you're not meant to speak ill of the dead. But when you keep a sick kid waiting and then tell the family to get the fuck out of your way, they're in your entranceway, yeah, you're a cunt. And that's not among the other, that's among, the other things that Warrior's done as a human being. You know, such as the homophobia and so on and so forth. But anyway, getting off track. Warrior wasn't really a white meat babyface, which is why people were glad he dropped the belt to Hogan. Except Warrior pissed Vince off, Warrior dropped the belt to Hogan. So it was Hogan all over again. Then people started getting sick of Hogan, and I'll go into that one in a bit. I'm going to talk about Royal Rumble 92 when I get to that, but it got to the point where Vince had to start editing shit to make it look like people still loved Hogan. People did not love Hogan anymore in the early 90s. That eventually led to Hogan turning heel, joining the EWO, and actually revitalizing himself. Because between 92 and 96, people were fucking sick of Hogan because he was still the same white meat babyface. The 90s were not the era of the white meat babyface. The 90s were the era of the badass anti-hero. That's why Austin got so popular. Put it this way. Hogan got booed the minute he walked into WCW because people didn't want a bar of him and his hokey-ass character anymore. So Vince kept looking for his next Hogan. So Lex Luger, who'd been working a fantastic gimmick as the narcissist because it worked towards the man behind the gimmick, turned him into a pro-USA Hogan clone. Guess what? People turned on Luger. Vince then tried to make Bret Hart the guy, but Bret Hart wasn't really white meat. Because Bret's matches weren't Hogan matches. They weren't a few select spots here and there. He had the 5 moves of doom, but his matches had psychology and storytelling to them. Vince is like, I don't know, Bret's kind of boring, I'm not really a technical guy, I don't expect my fans to love technical wrestling. Diesel, you're my guy. Pushed Kevin Nash, as I said before on my thing about big guys. Turned Nash from the silent badass into generic white meat babyface number 6. Business declined like a motherfucker. Nash didn't draw. The WWE's ratings were in the tank. Diesel held the belt for a year, and it did no good for the company. Now, it wasn't the disease itself that was killing the company at the time, the stagnancy and what have you. It was just a symptom. Because the rosters sucked. Vince's old guys from the 80s were going elsewhere, and the only ones he had left weren't really that interesting, or they couldn't wrestle anymore in the case of Ted DiBiase. So then Vince did the same to Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels turned from an entertaining mid-card heel into generic pretty boy good guy. Early 96 was the whole thing of Shawn Michaels living out the boyhood dream and winning the belt from Bret. The crowds hated Shawn, okay? Let me correct that. The WWF's target audience of males hated Shawn. The ladies fucking loved Shawn. You go back and you watch any show, any in your house show or any pay-per-view from late 96, early 97. Shawn Michaels is met with a combination of a loud booing from the blokes, high-pitched squealing from the girls. People were so sick of Shawn, the smarks particularly, they tried to have Psycho Sid turn heel on him in late 96. The New York crowd at Survivor Series 96 booed Shawn. They cheered Sid when he hit a 60-year-old man with a video camera, for fuck's sake. They were that sick of generic white meat baby faces. So then along comes a guy named Stone Cold Steve Austin, and we all know what happened from there, right? Austin was popular. They made him an anti-hero. Did the same thing with Undertaker when he was a face in those years. Kane was allowed to stay a silent badass when they turned him face after his feud with Undertaker. You know, Jericho was a different flavour of babyface that got over whenever he was babyface in those years. The Rock was white meat babyface. Crowd shat on him. Vince decided, fuck it, I'll turn him heel and see what happens. He naturally turned babyface because Vince let him show off his natural fucking charisma. And The Rock was an anti-hero too. The Rock and Austin are the yin and yang of that era. So then Vince is like, sweet, this is my magic formula to beat WCW. Lo and behold, Vince buys WCW, ECW. Decides John Cena's his next guy after years and years and years of fucking around, and turns Cena into a white meat babyface, and basically he's been trying to lead his company with white meat babyfaces ever since, much to the vitriol of the rest of us. Vince just doesn't like listening to the crowd, which leads me to my next point. Vince loves ignoring his fans. Vince is going to do whatever the fuck Vince is going to do. Now, a lot of people are saying, yeah, Damo, but to a lot of these points, and Timbuk says your counterpoint is the Attitude Era, right? As I said, Vince booking the way Vince books now is not Vince doing something new. It's Vince doing something old. The Attitude Era is an anomaly, right? The way Vince booked during the Attitude Era was a response to WCW caning his ass. He needed to do something drastic, and that's why he did something drastic. Vince himself was never comfortable booking the way he booked during the Attitude Era, okay? So, it's an anomaly. Failing that, Vince has generally always ignored his fans. Whatever Vince wants to do is what Vince wants to do. Let's start back in the 80s again with our favourite Orange Goblin, Terry Bollea. The Hulkster, dude. So back in the 80s, Jake the Snake Roberts was a pretty popular villain. Jake was different. Jake was fantastic. The man had psychology down pat and made it a fucking mastercraft. It's why AEW's using him currently to help Lance Archer, because the man can still fucking cut a promo on a dime. Jake is amazing. Homework assignment number 3, motherfuckers. Pause, go watch some Jake promos, come back and tell me what you've learned. But unless he's absolutely sloppy and smashed like he was at Heroes of Wrestling 99, Jake has always been a mastercraft of psychology. See, in the 80s, a lot of you guys would always cut the same, I have no indoor voice, I'm on cocaine, this shit is wild, I'm coming to beat your ass type promos, right? Whereas Jake's were very slow, very deliberate, very quiet. He'd look into the camera, and he'd make you listen to every word. And he had this dark charisma, and it was so different at the time. So Vince decided, fuck it, you know what my big money program is here? Hogan versus Jake. My top good guy versus the next up and coming bad guy. Except there was a problem. Vince started running Jake versus Hogan at house shows. And bear in mind, this is the 80s when anti-heroes weren't really a thing yet. I'm pretty sure this is before shit like Die Hard 2. I'm pretty sure we're looking at like 86, 87-ish or so. Vince ran Hogan versus Jake on the house show circuit. Guess what? The crowd started cheering Jake the Snake, the psychotic, vicious villain with the snake. They cheered him over Hogan. Vince panicked, and Vince was like, yep, okay, we're just going to pretend they're not cheering Jake. And so, yeah, guess what? This feud's not happening. Fuck it. It's not making it to TV. Hogan can go feud with someone else. Jake, you can fucking, I don't know, we'll figure something out. And that was that. So that was in the 80s. Then we get to what I was talking about with the Royal Rumble 92. Okay? Go watch the WWE Network. Go watch the Royal Rumble from 1992 on that one. Homework task number 4. Let's go watch that one, right? You'll notice something. Hogan, being the piss-poor example of a good guy he is, eliminated Psycho Sid after Sid eliminated him. You know, the match where it's every man for himself, yeah, the commentators started trying to talk that up as Sid's a scumbag. They started talking about Hogan throwing a tantrum on the outside, illegally helping Flair eliminate Sid to win the title, was Hogan being a justified plucky hero. Except he wasn't. In the network version of that show, you will hear the crowd cheering Hogan, and going along with what the commentators said. That's not the original unedited version. In the original version, the crowd booed Hogan out of the building. Mainly because Hogan was being a scumbag, but by that point they were sick of Hogan. That was problem number one with Hogan, or problem number two with Hogan. Problem number one or two, depending on which point of view you want to take. But Vince didn't give a shit. Vince would rather go, la 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 la, I can't hear you, and book Hogan still as the babyface in his feud with Sid leading up to WrestleMania 8. It's stupid. But Vince stopped listening to his fans, man. Vince does not give a fuck about his fans. People talk about the crowd shitting on Cena and Vince just going full steam ahead with that. People talk about crowds shitting on Roman and Vince going full steam ahead with that. I love Drew McIntyre, but I have to believe that if there were crowds, the crowds would have started turning on Drew by now, and Vince would have been like, shut the fuck up, I'm still going with Drew. But even during the 90s, with Shawn Michaels, Vince didn't give a fuck the crowds were booing Shawn. Vince loved Shawn. Vince had a little crush on Shawn. Vince had a very blatant crush on Shawn. Okay? Because when Shawn's getting Shawn is gay chants from most of the crowd, and Vince is refusing to turn him heel, yeah, that's Vince ignoring the crowds again. It's the same with fucking, like, let's take the entire year of 1995. The crowds were turning off their TV sets. Vince didn't give a shit. Vince just kept doing what Vince was doing. I can't believe I didn't think about this or touch on this until now. Two main reasons that the crowds really started turning on Vince by the end of 96 and started turning over to WCW. Aside from WCW having a better product naturally. Vince's own internal reasons for crowds turning on him, if that makes sense. Fake Razor Ramon, fake Diesel. Okay? So Nash and Hall signed with WCW in the middle of 1996 and kickstarted the NWO. Vince, being the classy individual he was, and still is, got salty and pissed off. So what did he do? He wanted to turn Jim Ross heel, so he started having Jim Ross cutting promos on Vince McMahon and saying that Razor and Diesel were coming back to the WWF. The other commentators would play it off like, the fuck are you talking about? Jim Ross would go, yo, nah, Razor and Diesel are coming back to the WWF. No, Jim, no, they're not. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall are not coming back to the WWF. No. Razor and Diesel are coming back to the WWF. Okay. So in September 1996, JR cut a heel promo, returned heel on the company, and said he was bringing out Razor and Diesel. Which he did. Fake Razor and fake Diesel. These were not Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. These were Rick Bogner and Glenn Kane Jacobs as fake Razor and fake Diesel. The crowd shat on them immediately. You want to know how long fake Razor and fake Diesel lasted? If you're thinking 1 week and Vince came to his senses and went, nah, okay, we're aborting this, you'd be wrong, and you have not been paying attention this entire video. If you're like, Vince kept it going until July 1997, even though he sent them down to a developmental territory after January, you would be correct! It took Vince nearly a year to realise this shit was going nowhere and aborted it completely. If that doesn't sum up Vince not listening to his fans, I don't know what does. It's a pretty egregious example. So Vince not listening to you guys bitching about how much you hate Roman or whoever, that's not anything new. That's a Vince problem from way back. Much like everything else I'm talking about. So moving on to our next and final point. The most egregious one. Booking to children. Now, it's pretty much impossible to browse any Attitude Era video without seeing some fuckwits typing in broken English going, oh bro, the Attitude Eras was the best G. All Vince McMahon does is appeal to fucking kids these days, docs. Well, again, how long have you been watching? Vince used to book a very child-friendly product. The WWE for the 80s was often advertised alongside a lot of children's TV shows back then. Hulk Hogan even had his own cartoon, Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling. Vince loved appealing to kids. Again, the Attitude Era only came about because of necessity. Vince basically went back to being child-friendly as soon as he could. Yes, the Benoit thing had a bit of a thing to do with it, but all Vince was doing was looking for an excuse to go back to booking what he knows. It's not a case of the PG era, okay? Because people talk about the 80s like it's this fabled golden time. It's the writing. Let's look at the 80s. It's not really that overly great. It's that these people were larger-than-life superheroes, right? You don't really have that nowadays, and if you do, they're the characters people turn on because we're still cynical about white meat baby faces, as I said. So yeah, Vince is very comfortable booking to children. Again, not a new thing. Vince booking to kids ain't a new thing, it's an old thing, just like everything else in this video. You noticing a pattern? As I say, a lot of the things people think is Vince getting complacent and going senile isn't Vince getting complacent and going senile. It's Vince going back to classic Vince because he has no reason not to. Who's going to stop him? Unless Triple H decides to commit patricide, we're stuck with Vince till he cocks it. Vince is the problem. Vince leaving would be the solution, but it's not looking too likely for the foreseeable future. Vince McMahon's a tough old bastard, so he's going to be here a while. There's plenty of other options out there if you don't like it, so go watch those. That's all you can really do if you don't like the WWE now. It's what I do. It's what I recommend you do. Anyway, thank you for listening to me ramble. This has been a very long video and my throat is very sore. I'm Damian Skyfire. Till next time.